it doesn't.
I'm Alan Korwin. I'm the author of 14 books, 10 of them on gun laws. I've been a full-time writer for over 20 years. And with my wife, I run a company called Bloomfield Press, with the largest publishers and distributors of books on gun law in the country. And I've learned an awful lot in that time, and I've become one of the leading national experts on gun law. I'm getting over a cold, so I hope you enjoy my baritone. This isn't about guns. The reason we're discussing this right now is because it was a tragedy in Connecticut 24 miles away, and politicians and the news media have decided it's time to discuss guns. This is really about freedom. This is about civil rights. The media decided, based on a tragedy, to discuss the Second Amendment and your right to keep and bear arms. I think this discussion should take place without tragedy as a backdrop. This is an important discussion. This is a fundamental right. It's been part of the nation since the nation was founded. Why are we discussing it now with tragedy as a backdrop? There's only one reason. There's a political agenda driving this discussion. If we need more guns or less guns, or more controls or less controls, that's a valid discussion. But discussing it in the light of a tragedy misplaces all the arguments. People's rights have been denied. We have what we call gun-free zones. That's the wrong term. These are make-believe gun-free zones. You're sitting in one right now. This is a make-believe gun-free zone. There's a sign on the wall that says no guns allowed. There's probably guns in this room right now. You can't tell. You don't know. There is such a thing as a gun-free zone. You're in one at an airport. You control egress and access. You put armed guards and metal detectors. You have them in courthouses. You have them in an airport. That's a gun-free zone. This is a make-believe gun-free zone. Newtown was a make-believe gun-free zone. We should discuss this, not in the midst of a tragedy. The teachers in the schools, sorry, this is that baritone. The teachers in that school had their civil rights denied. It's just like the 1960s. You can't eat at this lunch counter. You can't drink from this fountain. You can't exercise your right to keep and bear arms. So the teachers in the school were defenseless. They were mentally defenseless. They had the idea that if they had a firearm, this would be dangerous, and so they didn't. Now, 10 years earlier, in the 1950s, 10 years before the civil rights struggle, everybody had firearms. People brought guns to school. I carried a rifle on the bus in the Bronx. It was no big deal. I went to training. People brought guns to school and went hunting afterwards. You got varsity letters in shotgun. It was normal. We didn't think twice about it. If you remember the Mouseketeers, how many of you remember the Mouseketeers? They used to dance around and twirl their six-shooters. It was no big deal. Now teachers are afraid to have guns. And if people had guns, they could defend themselves. And nobody went crazy back in those days. This is about civil rights and about freedom. Why do you need an AR-15? Piers Morgan keeps yelling. Why does anybody need one? You don't need 10 pairs of shoes. You don't need a refrigerator the size of a closet. In America, ownership of property is not based on need. And there's nobody to tell you that, including anybody at ASU. That's the communist model. Property is not owned based on need. There's nobody sitting on a throne to tell you you need this so you can have it, or you don't need it so you can't have it. Piers Morgan, who's not an American citizen and is exercising our free speech, who tried to disarm us 230 years ago and failed and should get over it, is trying to convince you that you don't need this firearm, so we should be able to take it away. That's about freedom. You should ask yourself, does this maximize freedom? I got that from Sean Noble, John Shattuck's chief of staff. He was on one of our Congressmen for 16 years. He wants to decide you don't need something, so you shouldn't have it. Well, he's not on a throne, he's not a citizen, and he's practicing journalism without a license. Maybe we should license him. Why would a journalist object to a license? Why would an honest journalist object to a license? He'd like to license gun owners. Why would an honest journalist object to a license? Why would they object to registration? We register cars, that seems to make sense, but that's a subtle but seductive error of logic. If it makes sense to license a gun owner and register a gun, well, we should license drivers and register cars, right? That makes sense. It's an error of logic. If you license drivers and register cars, you should license pilots and register planes. And we do, because that makes sense. But if you should license gun owners and register guns, then you should license Pierce Morgan and reporters and register printing presses. And we don't, because it doesn't make sense. Because this is about freedom, and this is about civil rights. You don't license writers. And I ask reporters all the time, would you object to getting a license before you can write an editorial? And they say, well, no, you can't do that, it's my right. And they get all huffy. Well, what would be the problem? You're an honest writer, why wouldn't you get a license? And they don't even know, they can't even answer it, so I answer it for them. Because if you didn't pass the government test and pay the tax every year and carry your papers with you, you'd go to frickin' jail for writing an editorial. Because you didn't have your license and you didn't pass your test. The heck with it's a right. A right doesn't require a license. But I think Pierce Morgan ought to get one. Because he couldn't pass the test. He's not competent. Why does anybody need an AR-15? Which is the communist model. And let me tell you something. You never want to need an AR-15. Because if you need an AR-15, man, all bets are off. And I'll give you a better answer. You want an AR-15 for the same reason the police do. And there must be a reason, because millions of Americans own AR-15s. There must be a reason they want them. Well, they want them for the same reason the police do. The AR-15 is one of the finest rifles made. It works. It's accurate. It's reliable. It's easy to maintain. When the chips are down, it can protect your life. The anti-rights people hit you with errors of logic all the time. They will tell you guns kill people. I'll tell you guns protect people. They will say guns cause death. I will tell you guns save lives. Guns stop crime. Guns protect you. Guns are good. Guns are the reason America is still free. And you won't see that in the news, fair and balanced as it is. You won't hear that, see that, or get a flavor of it at all. You're being given Kool-Aid so fast and furious, that you don't have an inkling of what this debate is about. My esteemed colleague talked about assault weapons. There is no such thing. There is no such thing. They're having trouble defining it, and I'll tell you why. You're in college, you'll be able to understand this. You ready? Assault is a kind of behavior. It is not a kind of hardware. Assault is a kind of behavior. You can assault a person with a one-shot Derringer. And an AR-15 is a rifle. It's a regular rifle. It's accurate, it's reliable, the police use them. You want your police armed with the best rifle, the most high-powered ammunition, and all the ammo they can carry. And you want the same, even more, because you're the first responder. The criminals attack you first. If somebody runs in here with a gun, the police are the second responders. And that's more Kool-Aid that the media keeps feeding you. You see the police parading around in their battle gear after it's over. They parade around on camera and the media and Piers and Wolf, and where do they get these names, and the rest of them, the first responders, they're the second responders. You're the first responder. You want the same firearms that they want because you face the criminals first. This is about freedom. This is about civil rights. This should not take place in the light of tragedy. And hopefully this evening you'll get a dose of sanity and reality. And I'll handle anything my esteemed colleague and you guys have for questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.